Okay, well, welcome, friends. We are in week
Slide
5 now of our ongoing series on how we can bring some grace to our political conversations. And if you were listening to the sermon this morning, Father Bill talked about from the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the meek, blessed are the meek," and he offered an interpretation of meek as those who are gentle. And it occurred to me that that's very much what we have been wrestling with these last several weeks, and is certainly at the core of what today's session is about. How can we bring grace and to ourselves and to those that we are dialoguing with, or perhaps those that we are avoiding having a dialogue with? So that is our topic today, and I'm going to now turn it over to our presenter, Joe Lavella. Take it away, Joe.
All right. Can you see this, my slide?
We can, but you need to hit play from start.
Oh, then I have to. All right. The authors say that grace is the first step of engagement. They say that our political dialogue is sick because it has a grace deficiency. And by what they mean by grace is infusing our discussions with kindness and respect, not for any other reason other than that these are fellow human beings, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, as some of our discussion, before this started, indicated, that we should to everybody extend the same love, unmerited, that God extends to us. That applies even to our most stringent adversaries. And recognize that everybody, all of these people are God's children. They are as worthy as we are to be here on earth, and that we should view America not as a place that is just for us and not for them, but that everybody matters. That what makes America great is that we bring a diversity of experiences, different viewpoints, and we all come together and something better comes out of it because we have disagreements and because we have different viewpoints. And that's part of what makes us great, and that's part of recognizing the worthiness of everybody else to participate in dialogue with us. Next slide.
Yeah, oh, sure. And I will just
unless you wanted to comment more.
I want to just underline that and say, as Christians, right, we should be very comfortable with that idea, because it is essentially a body of Christ metaphor, right? It's the body of Christ that Paul speaks of, this idea of bringing all of our gifts, all of our diversities, all of our perspectives. We are better together than we are apart. We are more complete. We see a more complete picture of God when we all come to the table. So as Christians, that's right out of Paul. Go ahead.
Okay. The first symptom of grace deficiency is not giving grace to ourselves. We need to believe that we have value, that our opinions count, that we have something to contribute as well. That the attitude that the authors bemoaned was that of, well, what doesn't really matter whether I vote or not? My vote's not going to make a difference at the end. The forces of the world are too big for my vote to make a difference. And they're saying, no, you have to believe that you matter, that your voice counts. And when you do that, then you're better able to understand that, well, that's true of my neighbor as well. Next slide. The second symptom of grace deficiency is the way we talk about our politicians. We don't see them as real people like us, but as caricatures. We will sometimes refer to, I'm going to vote for my candidate because he or she is the lesser of two evils, implying that they're all evil. They want us to understand that politicians are people worthy of our respect. That their public service has costs. Their families might be ridiculed. Everything they do is scrutinized. That there is risk to public service. Emotional, physical, financial, etc. And that we should give them the grace to recognize that, yes, your public service has some costs. We understand that on our behalf, you are making some kind of sacrifice. Next slide. The third symptom, and I think obviously the biggest one, is the way we treat each other. And the main manifestation there, go back. The main manifestation there is distrusting the motives of people who disagree with us. Pro-choice people want to kill babies. Conservatives hate poor people. We progressives say that the only reason that the conservatives, adopt the policies that they promote are that they're greedy. And the conservatives say that the reason the progressives have their policies is that they're alarmist and they're manipulative and they want to create a nanny state, because they don't trust people. We, instead of looking at the merits of other people's positions and the reasons behind them, we dismiss them as having bad motives. And when we have bad motives, that means that we're also demonizing them. And when we brand the people who disagree with us as nefarious, it ends up actually reinforcing our position in the identity and makes us inflexible, because once it becomes, well, that view is an evil view, we can't evolve toward it and try to find a middle ground, because that would mean that we'd be going over to the dark side. We don't want to do that. And so, this idea of failing to recognize that other people may be having positions different than ours for legitimate reasons prevents us from ever finding a middle ground and actually making any sort of meaningful progress. Next slide. Now, that doesn't mean that every political position is a valid position. I'm quoting from the authors. Grace simply means that all people are valuable. It doesn't mean that all opinions are valid. Grace isn't rolling over or acquiescing to those who have completely different values than we do. It is simply seeing our shared connections and acknowledging each other's dignity. We treat the other people at other people at the table with us with grace, but we don't have to therefore, give credence to, crazy conspiracy theories or positions that have no evidence. We recognize there's value in the person, but we don't have to accept that their positions are valid. And in that connection, and this is again harking back to the discussions earlier, the authors themselves say that sometimes there are people that they cannot have dialogue with because it's not possible with certain people. The ones who just want to, fight battles, to burn everything to the ground, to try to discredit everybody. You can talk to them for a little bit, but at some point you have to say, it's not worth it to engage with you. We respect you as a person. We respect that you have different views than ours, but we don't see any fruitfulness to a dialogue with you. But they also say, but you don't give up too easily. That is true, that there are some people you can't get through, but you don't give up too easily. And they talked about, after the last presidential election, they had one of their blog listeners who was very, very upset about Donald Trump's election and demonized him and all Republicans, including the conservative, author here, and would send, emails to them saying very, very insulting things about the author. And, their response was not to debate, not to try to change, get him to change his mind, but just to say, we acknowledge that you're very, very upset and that this election is, very troubling for you, and they kept on sending messages like that, and over time, he stopped being angry. He still remained concerned and worried, He didn't change any of his positions, but the tone of his messages changed, and he stopped spitting vitriol at the author who was the conservative one. Next page.
And I
Oh.
just want to underline, there's a lot here on this slide. That first bullet you have there, one of the objections or concerns that folks emailed me before this series began was, I hope this doesn't become a class that is all about creating false equivalencies. This idea, well, can't we all just get to this world where we realize that all opinions are valid, that all values are okay? Can't we all just come together and come to an agreement? And that's really not what they're saying at all. The grace doesn't mean all opinions are valid, doesn't mean that all facts are true or all things offered as facts are true. It just means that the person you're talking with is valuable. The person you're speaking with has equal human dignity, and is a beloved child of God, just as you are. It's keeping us from going to that demonization space, and that's an important distinction that sometimes gets lost and into this false equivalency argument. So I think you've got a lot here on this slide, so we can talk more.
Well, and let me just say that the authors did use the word false equivalency. They did say that the risk of taking your position and branding the other side as demonic is that it ironically ends up creating false equivalency of, well, I've got your view and you've got my view, and let's see whose view is right. And that sort of gives credence to both sides in a way that isn't right. I originally had two slides here. That one of them was about no false equivalency, and then when I combined them, to make it shorter, I ended up editing those words out. But yes, Chris, thanks for bringing that up, because that is the risk that the authors specifically highlighted is, don't think that that means that don't create a false equivalency between two different views, because not all views are equally valid.
Yeah, and if people don't understand that concept of false equivalency, when I was in college, I saw a debate moderated by William F. Buckley, of all people, and he gave a beautiful metaphor for false equivalency. False equivalency is where there's a train coming, and there's a little old lady crossing the tracks, and she hasn't gotten to it yet, and somebody comes along and pushes her right in front of the train. So now she's going to get hit. And another person comes along and at the last second pushes her out of the way and saves her. A false equivalency is where a third person stands there watching all this and says, all you guys are doing is pushing around old ladies.
All right. This first bullet is sort of my synthesis of what the author said, not what they exactly said. But the point is, don't try to debate nicely. Try not to debate. And they, on their show, on their weekly broadcast, had what they called the Great Redhead Debate, where they were going to be a model of how to debate civilly. And they undertook, and it started out with one stated their position and the other one stated their position, and they defended their positions, and they figured out that no, that format was wrong from the starting point, because when it started with declaring your position, you couldn't back away from it. You had to keep on defending it, and they never had the grace to uncover their shared values, because their focus was on simply defending the positions they have already declared. And they saw in the viewers who would comment that yes, and they were then taking sides. All it did was reinforce their view of their pre-existing views. Next slide. And so, now when they have discussions on their show, they do not begin with an opening statement of position. They recognize from the start that they owe each other mutual respect, and that they share many of the same fundamental values. They don't question their motives, but they start talking about what do we want? What are our goals here? What are we trying to accomplish? And when they approach it that way, that highlights that they actually many times have the same or similar goals. And when it looks like what's the best way to accomplish these goals, they can then put out ideas and test them and maybe find a place for compromise, or that they can actually agree on certain things as a way to accomplish what they both recognize as being important. Next slide. So just, I guess this is by way of summary or practice pointers. Make your focus be, what are our shared values? What connects us? Instead of what are our conflicts as the starting point. Give the benefit of the doubt. Don't, if the other party makes a concession of some kind, don't pounce on it triumphantly. And if they have a point that disagrees, don't question their motives. Give them the benefit of the doubt that although they disagree with you, they actually want to accomplish something good just like you do. Try not to shut down and say, well, we can't talk about this anymore. Don't jump to that so quickly. Figure out ways to move forward. Meet people where they are without expecting them to change. Find out what their positions are. Don't make your focus be trying to change them. And again, I'm quoting an excerpt from the authors. Grace means that other people do not have to comply with our worldview in order to be worthy of sharing the world with us. But when we offer grace to others, it also allows for us to give ourselves more grace. It lets us see that, well, maybe I didn't think this through completely. Maybe there are some flaws in my position, and have that be okay, not a sign of failure, but a sign of growth. That if you give yourself the grace to admit that you could have been wrong, and don't see that as disqualifying you from contributing to the conversation, then you get to grow. And I guess their parting thought, I would say, on this is that it is God's grace at the end of the day. We are stewards of it. And we need to keep that in mind, that we have to act as with stewardship responsibility to how can we best make use of this precious gift of God's grace. Next slide. And last, and this did not come from the authors. These are just two quotes that I had from another source, another time, that I just thought were very beautifully put and apt, and I'd like to close with them. The first is from a law school professor. Reclaiming civility and community depends less on what is happening in the White House and more on what is happening in our own homes, schools, workplaces, places of worship, boardrooms, labs, and classrooms. We have the choice with every word, action, reaction, decision, and virtual form of engagement to reject the vitriolic in favor of the more tempered, benevolent, and humane. We can decide to give the benefit of the doubt and stay mindful of the promise of redemption.
Oh man. Can I just say before you do the next one?
Yeah.
That is a beautiful summary of what our goals in this series. The goal of this series is personal transformation for each and every one of us. It's not about changing the world. It's not about changing CNN. It's not about changing the politicians. This is about changing us, every one of us, and on the play field that is our everyday life. That is our friends and our neighbors, our social media pages, whatever it happens to be. And that's such a beautiful reminder that the kingdom of God was never going to be voted in. It was never going to be a new program offered by somebody. It was never going to be a new deregulation of some kind. It is always going to be the changing of human hearts, one person loving another at a time. So I just love that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And now from Joan Chittister, a religious order of Saint Benedict, wherever we are, in whatever family, church, city, society, or country, We must take the first step toward a loving, peaceful world by speaking there as we would want the entire world to talk to one another. Human unity or world divisions begin with what I say to people and about them. Love thy neighbor is, in the end, all about what I say to the rest of the world and how I say it.
Amen. Should we stop the sharing there?
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you, Joe. I just want to applaud you for that summary. I thought it was a really nice summary of a difficult, challenging chapter. And I don't know if folks are noticing that the first 3 weeks, the first 3 chapters were really about working on ourselves. How can we get ourselves in shape, so to speak, and help, how to get healthy a little bit so that we can have these conversations. This is the first week in their formulation of a skill for going forward. How do we begin to engage? And their first idea there is this idea of granting each other grace. Feedback, comments, questions. Carolyn, go ahead.
How do we print that last slide?
Yeah.
I would
Can you?
Why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? We'll share it in the email, okay? And if Joe is really tricky and handy, he might copy and paste them into the chat. But we'll share it as well.
Okay.
And if you're not on the email list, shoot me an email and I'll put you on it. Other questions, comments, feedback. What are your thoughts on that? There was a lot there. Really great stuff.
Question?
Yeah.
One of the things, and again, this has happened in the last week or so with some of the discussions I've had, the difficulty, and I really like what the law professor said, but the difficulty, and this probably reflects where I'm coming from, but the conspiracy theories that, you know, COVID is not real, the doctors are all lying, the numbers aren't true. I mean, I just don't know where to go with some of that conspiracy theory kind of. That makes it real. I've never encountered that in an election discussion. I don't remember ever having those kinds of issues in an election discussion. That's what seems different this year.
Yeah,
because you've never been in COVID.
and
No, it's because you never had a president.
I would actually say, John, let's hold that question for next week, because it gets to a little bit of a different topic, very vital one though. Is how do we in this world of a politicized media, right? Politicized everything. We have politicized the truth. We have politicized facts. So different parts of the country have a whole different fact pattern in front of them. And it's how do you engage when you can't even agree on basic facts? I think that's a great discussion for next week.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
And
Amy.
it's not just different parts of the country, it's different parts of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, that we're getting bombarded by all over the world with theories that and what looks like facts that seem impossible to believe and verify.
Yeah. Go ahead, Amy.
I want to follow up on what John says. I get really upset when I see people get alternate facts or whatever you want to call them that actually put their lives in danger. You know, it's fine to disagree about whether poor people should be helped or whether they're just lazy, all that stuff. I mean, those are political. But the stuff about the virus, you know, that it's not important, it's not, you know, all that stuff legitimately puts people's lives in danger. And if we are to love our neighbor, what do we do about the fact that we want to love these people? And I mean, I guess they all have a choice whether to believe this stuff or not. But what do we do about that?
Yeah, well, and I think, Amy, to this topic today, this idea of grace, I think one thing to remind ourselves about is what you just said about this one topic is really applicable to all, right? Any political topic, you can eventually make the argument that people's lives are at risk at the end of the day. And so the question is, how do we get past that sort of a basic objection? How can I have a conversation with you because you're believing in policies that are putting people's lives in danger or killing people? I could make that argument about virtually any political topic, my friends. How do we move beyond that is, I think, the question that for us today. How do we give the other person grace in that dialogue without the false equivalency, which is not what I'm arguing. Does that make sense? Yeah.
In a way, yes.
That's the hard part. I think that's where the rubber hits the road. Other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Debbie. Yeah, you want me to, you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yes, I agree. And I think that follows on what John's original comment made in the very beginning, which was a great lead into this week's topic about this being a very different experience for all of us right now and how it's affecting our behavior. And I think Carolyn had a great comment saying we should replace contempt for compassion. But for me, it's not so much contempt, it's that my behavior has been reduced almost to the lowest common denominator too. I find myself reacting in the same way that people I don't agree with react, whether it's language or being angry or having a chip on my shoulder. So this has been good because it's helping me to look at my own behavior, but I think it is very difficult. And then you add on to alternative facts and lies, but it's our behavior and how I feel about myself that's has been concerning to me.
Yeah, and I think that's why the authors really start with, okay, step one, get emotionally healthy, get some perspective, put politics in its place, see the jersey you're wearing, notice your ability to take it off. And so, yeah, I mean, you begin really with self-work, and then start thinking about how we're going to engage with somebody. Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts. What did people think about the point from this chapter, which I think is a really good one, is distrust of motives. Noticing when you are distrusting the motives of the other. I think that's as almost like the entryway, is almost the doorway into a graceful conversation with somebody. Notice the distrust of their motives if you're harboring it, and then see if you can put this distrust aside for a moment. I think, what did people think about that? Isn't it?
Chris?
Yeah, go ahead.
That I hope I'm responding to that question. Distrusting motives means only looking at, well, surface details or what a person says, but not questioning why she or he says it. And this occurred to me as I was tearing way too fast through the voluminous League of Women Voters information newspaper about candidates who would be in my area. And I thought, I realize now that I'm barely taking a lot of this in. How can I say that I really wholeheartedly stand with the person I'm going to be voting for when I myself am so deficient in grasp of the famous facts? So that is probably true of others. It doesn't mean that my motives are bad, but it does mean that my information is, or at least faulty. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of what they're saying, isn't it? And therefore I have to assume that of the other.
Yeah, I think do the self-work. Like when you're about to have a conversation with somebody who you disagree with, check yourself at the door. Okay, what are my prejudices? What are my biases? What are my preconceived ideas about this person's motives before I even get into this, right? Sylvia, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna quote one of my, somebody I worked for before. She was always saying, assume goodness when you enter any conversation. And we weren't talking about politics, we were talking about engineering, but it goes about everything, because a lot of times when you're doing that, you know, you have, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of, say, different kinds of engineering, designing a plane and how it will look if only structural engineers did it, or if only environmental ones did it, or that kind of stuff. So we all kind of take our camp, even in science, right? You know, I wanted to make it whatever. But how we engage in those conversations as we balance requirements, etc., in terms of nobody wakes up and goes to work saying, I'm going to go do a lousy job today. You know? I want to see how I could mess it up the best. But we we come trying to do our best and being able to have that conversation, even when it's technical, and just assume goodness when we come into that conversation. So I think it applies to, every part of your engagement.
I don't know if people remember this, to your point, Sylvia, in the first week of this class, we brought up a book by Jonathan Haidt called, gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head.
Righteous Mind.
The Righteous Mind. Thank you. And he basically presents a ton of research by himself and others that suggests that liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, come at the world with basically 5 shared values. We all share them. What we differ in how we rank them. And I find that to be a powerful reminder of that very point of how can we come into the conversation respecting the human dignity of the other and putting down our prejudices and our demonizations and our, the stereotyping, the caricatures that we allow ourselves to create, and that at the media chambers, the echo chambers we're all in, reverberate with constantly. Friends, I think I'm gonna need to go to. Anybody want to have the last word?
I think
Go
that's
ahead,
a good point if you know
Oh.
the topic before you get there, but you don't.
You don't always know. Yeah, right. That's a good one. It's almost like you can't get all prepared with your policy points. You have to go in not
Exactly.
sure where the conversation is going to go. Go ahead, Dick. Last word, and I'm going to
I've
close.
had a chance to watch some politicians work the room. And my observation about these people is they're doing a lot of listening. The good politicians are doing a lot of listening, and we don't do enough listening these days.
Amen. We will spend an entire week on just that topic of getting curious. In fact, that's next week's topic, getting curious and doing some listening. So friends, I'm gonna sign off here and bring our time together to an official close. But I'm going to pass the baton over to Joe, and he is going to hang around. He's got some really great discussion questions for anybody who wants to continue the conversation for the next 30 minutes as a kind of afterglow. So thank you again. If we could all just give Joe a hand and appreciate his good work today. And we will see you next week. Be gentle, my friends.
Right.
Have a good, safe week.
Oh, there's a clap.